And then I think even bigger picture than that, we have an economic system right now that is concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a few. And it's predicated on this kind of globalization of the economy, right? Where you can tear down forests in the southeastern US and for the benefit of people overseas. And if the resource were actually used and controlled by the community, we would not see that level of destruction, because you don't need, however many millions of pounds of wood pellets in Gloucester, Mississippi. They don't need that, right? So if we had economies that were more community-based and local, with more local control over the resources, you wouldn't have this large-scale industrial exploitation that is there to supply global markets.
Well, this morning, afternoon, and evening, we hope you're doing well. Welcome to another episode of the Hardwood Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Thomas Rashad Easley, aka the Hip Hop Forester, but also I'm going to say aka the Hardwood Podcast co-facilitator and presenter, because my friend and brothers here, Benedict Olupo. What's going on, my guy? Just want to check in before we kick off the episode.
That's a beautiful day. Here again. I'm ready.
Y'all heard him. Beautiful day. Whenever he says that, it means more to me hearing him saying it than Ice Cube. Today was a good day. And today, we have none other than, for me as a friend, and I know I'm not going to go really big in introducing this leader, because that is exactly what she is. She is a leader. It's a leader, in my opinion, that should have even a bigger platform, because they've been working in the space for more than two decades. They're working in the space of environmental justice. They've been working in the space of environmental activism. They've been working in the space of political activism. They've been working in the space of community activism, and putting their money where their mouth, heart, and head is. And that's something that you don't see a lot of leaders doing. And she's been doing this really, at least I've known her for almost a decade since she started this work. She leads an organization that needs no introduction as well, but is going to get one, Dogwood Alliance, based here in North Carolina, which is where I am based. And they work with communities that are on the front line. Matter of fact, they're on the front line. And they use their resources to support folks who have challenges, and also to educate us all on how to make the world better. And they bring in multiple views as much as they can. The person that we're interviewing today, the person that we're talking to today, because this is not an interview, this is a conversation, is none other than Danna Smith, CEO of Dogwood Alliance. And before she says anything, I want to let you all know you're going to hear her say a name differently on this podcast from me, because she really is like family. So she calls me by my middle name. So you will not hear the first name, really. So I just, because I've had it where people are like, who is this person? I'm like, it's the same person. You just know me by my first name. So Danna, how are you doing today, my friend? How's it going?
Oh, I'm good. I'm enjoying this beautiful day. It is a beautiful day. And thanks so much for having me on, Rashad. Really appreciate this opportunity to just chat with you this morning. Love our talks.
Well, look, you have really been a blessing for me, using that language intentionally, because if it weren't for you, I don't think that even though I was engaged in activism kind of, already from my civil rights background, but when it comes to doing work in the environment, connecting with Dogwood helped give language to what I was already working on. Because I just felt challenged by the industry, like that say I'm a part of, and what we do and how it had been done up to that time. Of course, still, but I'm just saying, to that time, I was trying to figure it out. And then this great organization reaches out to me and invites me to come in and do some work with them, storytelling, because you understand that it's storytelling. And then to also now get engaged as a former, board member now, because I just rotated off, but still always once a board member with Dogwood, and you respect them always. So what I think people need to know is, can you tell us a little bit about the history, of Dogwood Alliance, and your role? And I know you can, because you're going to do this naturally, and just where the name came from, the history, your role, and where the name came from.
Yeah, so I guess it was in the early to mid 90s, the paper industry was undergoing a major expansion across the southeastern US. And over time, a lot of people were starting to see the level of forest destruction, the accelerated clear cutting, where they just come in and just like tear down entire forests, 20 to hundreds of acres at a time. And people were seeing those forests then being replanted, but in single rows of pine trees, pine plantations, essentially. And so all across the South, people were starting to see that this phenomenon was having big impacts on the forests. And also they were building these facilities in rural communities that were chipping up trees and then sending the chips to the paper mills. So we saw this like influx of all these facilities that were coming in that would allow the paper mills to source their wood from longer distances. And so communities were also starting to express concern about the disruption of these facilities on their local quality of life. So back in 1996, I was at a forest conference in Alabama, a grassroots forest conference. And, there were people there from all across the region talking about this phenomenon of all this accelerated logging and clear cutting and the disruption of, rural community quality of life. And at that point, I was a major catalyst, but not the only person who recognized that we needed a regional effort focused on protecting southern forests from this industry. And so long story short, that's how Dogwood Alliance got created, was out of a grassroots effort of grassroots concern about the impacts of the paper industry on southern forests. Now, the name of, let me say one other thing. We did not know at the time what we learned a few years later, which is that the South is the world's largest wood producing region. And the rate and scale of logging is 4 times that of South American rainforest. And here was this like relatively small group of grassroots activists saying, yeah, we're going to get out there and we're going to like protect our forests. And I think, we had no idea at that moment in time what we were really up against. And it's probably a good thing because we had so much belief in what we could do that, had we known that, it may have tempered our passion. It may have tempered our ability to actually get the organization off the ground, because we might have felt as if it was too daunting to take on. But 3 years in, we took it on, and from there on out, we just started making amazing progress, and up to this day, and we can talk about that a little bit maybe later. But in terms of the name, so I remember we had a membership meeting of all the community groups, that were a part of Dogwood Alliance from across the region before it was Dogwood Alliance. And we were strategizing. And one of the things that we were talking about is, what are we going to name this organization that is becoming this network of communities across the South fighting to protect our forests and communities? And there were lots of different names that were thrown up on the little flip chart, and the 2 that came up as the top 2 were Communities United Against Chip Mills, which the chip mills were those facilities that were, Quackum, and Dogwood Alliance. And so people had to get up and like defend, the name, whoever, the 2 people who had put those 2 names up there had to get up there and kind of make their case, for Communities United Against Chip Mills or Dogwood Alliance. And the Communities United Against Chip Mills, of course, they didn't really need to make a case because it was very clear, like that's what we were doing. But the person who stood up and defended the Dogwood Alliance talked about the beauty of the southern forest, talked about the dogwood tree as being an emblem of something that people across the South can relate to. Everybody knows the dogwood tree. Talked about how the dogwood tree exists in the understory of a canopy of a forest and is often considered to be a junk species by the forest industry because you can't really make paper out of it, or you can't make, solid wood out of it. And talked about how the dogwood tree is one of the first trees to bloom in the spring. And so it's a big sign of hope, right? And at that point, it was like a no-brainer. Everybody voted for the Dogwood Alliance.
So Thank you for giving us that history. I just want to point out something that happened to me when I first came to North Carolina. Then I'll go to the next question. When I came to NC in '04, I came, to work, at the now still the biggest institution in the state of North Carolina, or the flagship being NC State. And, I was still considered one of the top 3 forestry environmental programs in the country. I say top 3, all right, because I'm going to put Oregon State there, UGA. I went to one of those schools anyway, we're back up. Anyway, okay. But I get there, and the rhetoric is rhetoric, what I want to say, because I want everyone listening to pay attention to how Danna described what happened to the forests. You cut them down and then they get replanted in rows. Okay, so when I come in North Carolina, they say, we have 65% more forests now than we did 50 years ago. And I'm like, how is that possible? But in my mind, I'm like, wow, that's wonderful. That's great. That's good. Like, that's a good thing. That means that our management has really been great until when you go out and you start looking at the forest. And I realized that there's a word that if you added it in front of the adjective to forest, you can't say that anymore. Do we have natural forests anymore?
Mm.
Do we have native growth species there anymore? Is the soil more stabilized now? Do we have more flooding? See, when you kind of start getting into, as they say, the weeds, it changes what you can say. Because you see, and I think that's the challenge that people might struggle with if they're outside of the industry, because it's like they wouldn't know to ask a question like that. You see what I'm saying? It's more like, but I'm like, what if we asked it this way? What kind of forest? How, like, are they planted or were they naturally there? And what species is there and what species was there before? And I think that then would change the narrative, that people are hearing. Because I know it changed it for me when I started asking questions like that. And it also changed the responses that people would also give me. So with that, what I wanted to say, and if you wanted to say something to that, Danna, that's fine, because I feel like I may have cut you off. Or I see Bennett has something too.
No. Bennett, go ahead.
The size of the continuous forest, like the continuity, because that's a big thing too. You could have a pocket of native species and then be surrounded by just the same monocrop, whatever it may be, but that the size makes a big difference with the edge effect and just having the influx of wildlife, being able to actually call it home, because a lot of species need a lot of land and need a lot of just area to exist in. So I think that along.
So true. I was just going to add too, the age of a forest, right? Because the older a forest is and the more complex it is, the more interconnected it is because of its age, the better job it does of all of these things like purifying our water, our air, storing carbon, providing natural flood control, regulating the climate. So I was going to add age. And then also, what about prior to 1950? Right. Why is 1950?
Why is that? The measuring stick.
I mean, the whole region used to be covered in old, intact, biodiverse forests prior to 1950, so why is 1950 somehow the magic number? And that's when they started plantations. That's right. The 1950s is when they started planting plantations. So.
And if you go back to the late 1800s, that's when land use started changing overall in the country. When it started over harvesting so much. I mean, the Midwest actually had forests too. I know when I got to Iowa and I saw cornfields, I was like, oh my gosh. But then when I looked up the history of how it was, I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, there were trees here at one time, And so then that's when you start realizing, and I see you, brother, so please, no, come. Matter of fact, let me stop. I'll just
but just growing up, going to northeastern Iowa, like you see the forest in pocketed areas, just scattered across the whole, like all the fields that you see, and it's just beautiful with the bluffs, and that's just stripped away when it's just all fields. But I just wanted to add that on, just like growing up seeing that and knowing that there are those pockets.
No, please, no. See, this, I told you this was a conversation. It's not an interview. That's what I'm talking about. So, in terms of humanity, Danna, and the environment, why is this a critical time for rights advocacy, human rights advocacy? And I like how Bennett has it, extra human life, because we're also talking about the beings that make it easier for us to be here, but they just don't speak like us, like a deer, like a horse, like a buffalo, like a bite, So why is this a critical time for advocacy for every group that I just tried to mention and others that I have?
Well, if we don't course correct our ongoing destruction of nature, we're on a sure path to extinction. I mean, it's as simple as that. We are destroying nature for financial benefit of a few and throwing communities under the bus in the process. The system that is in play right now is one that is predicated on extraction at an industrial scale of natural resources. And that is destroying the natural world that is critical for human life to exist. The places where that is happening typically tend to be in places where people are people of color, where people are, where wealth has been difficult to come by, and that's by design, right? Where people have been oppressed. And so if we don't think about the destruction of the environment as a human rights issue, then we're missing the big picture of actually how industrial extraction is allowed to continue, right? The reason why we're, in this mess that we're in is because certain people have been seen as expendable. And so their environment can be destroyed for the benefit of somebody, living further away because they're not experiencing the devastation themselves. And so this sort of predatory system that preys on people of color and low-income communities is what's enabling this massive level of destruction to continue. And so it is, human rights issues are directly tied to the destruction of the planet and environmental destruction. You can't separate the two. Bennett and I were talking before this about how, we've sort of become a society where we believe that humans are somehow separate from nature, but we're not. We're not robots, we're mammals. And we depend on nature for our survival. And so when our environment is destroyed, that is a human rights issue. All of the nature provides everything that we all need to survive. And it did so for hundreds of thousands of years without people having to buy it, without people having to pay for it. It was available and there for everyone. And it's only over time that this construct has been created by a few, by a small number of people who figured out that they could acquire wealth by controlling the resources. And so the environmental fights are about fundamentally human rights to clean water that were basic human rights before people came in and started, exploiting them for personal gain and controlling them and owning the resources. So you really can't, at the root cause of all of this is a system that owns nature, right? That treats nature as if it's a bank account that belongs to only a few people. When the reality is that nature should be everybody's. It should be providing all of the basic necessities for everyone. So when that's taken away for the profits of a few, that is a human rights violation. That is a human rights issue.
As you're saying that, it makes me think about the work that you do in education. Like I said, that's kind of how you and I met in grassroots activism, negotiations with large corporations, and many other activities. And that response you just gave, I like how you said it because you mentioned that there's a lot going on a macro level, but it's almost like it's a microcosm of individuals or groups who benefit, from the exploitation of the masses. mentioning, you talking about the land and that indigenous communities, I'm speaking in general, some may challenge this, but it's not about land ownership. It's about land relationship and stewardship and honoring the land. It's not about our owners, but I'm a part of this. When I first learned forestry, and something that you mentioned earlier, we will always talk about the canopy and the overstory, and we wouldn't really delve deep into the understory except for to count it or to identify it being there. But as I started learning with indigenous communities, everything that you just said, so I'm not trying to over repeat genius, you already heard it, but like everything we need is there and everything that's out there is valuable. So my question is, thinking about how you have brought in education, activism, working with large corporations, even those that are challenged, by some of the work that you and I say that we have done and that we're continuing to do. Why is this forefront approach needed from organizations that I do feel, just my opinion, that Dogwood does well? But why is this forefront approach needed from organizations?
Yeah, well, I'll say first and foremost, underpinning the most, in my opinion, important aspect to our ability to solve these deep-rooted problems is people power. It's grassroots organizing. It's community-based. It has to come from communities that are being exploited, that are on the front lines of this fight, because it's their community. It's their, they're feeling the impacts, and they often are the ones who know the solutions, know what their community needs. So at the forefront or at the base of any strategy, in my opinion, to be successful in this effort to create a new paradigm, we have to center grassroots organizing, people power building, and we have to put those who are on the front lines at the forefront of that fight. We have to support them in their efforts to protect their communities. And then in terms of, and that requires, education and outreach and all of those things. But the fundamental strategy has to be built upon an understanding that until we have enough people power to overpower the influence and the policy and the economics of those that are benefiting from the current system, we'll never be able to get the change that we're looking for. And then in terms of, if you've got a strong base of people power, then you can look at what are the best strategies, in the moment. And those things might fluctuate. Like it might be in one community, the best strategy is a legal strategy. We're going to sue the company for violating their air permit for 10 years, as is the case with the wood pellet industry in Drax in a little town called Gloucester, Mississippi, which has been violating its air permit for so long. So there's a legal strategy around that, right? It could be that in other areas that we have to change policy at the federal level. We have to get, stop biomass, for example, from receiving subsidies from the U.S. government, or it could be that like communities in North Carolina are wanting to target directly one of the big wood pellet manufacturers in Viva, and I've launched a petition and tried to, get that company themselves to take some action. And so if you have a strong grassroots base and people power building, no matter what the best strategy might look like, depending on the community, you've got that powerful leverage that you can bring to the table regardless of what the strategy is. And so that's why, for me, the best strategy of all is just movement building. It's just building that people power movement so that we can affect change at multiple levels where necessary. Because, look, this problem that we just described is built by design. It's political, it's economic, and it's legal. And so you have to kind of be able to adapt your strategy based on opportunities in lots of different ways, because, there's lots of different things that feed into making the problem what it is. So there is no silver bullet except people power.
Danna, that's so brilliant what you said. You mentioned a lot of words there in that wonderful response. But you also mentioned the word that I just want to point out before I go to the next question. You mentioned that what's going on, a lot of it's actually legal. And one of the things that I've done a recent video, I'm just going to put it out there, a little plug for my company, My Heart for Diversity. We do like little snippets. Yeah. And I have a video out where I challenge people to think past the legalities of things, because technically the justice system has never supported poor communities, and those communities that have been marginalized. So for those of us who sometimes work, I'm not talking about us, but I'm saying those of us who may even work in the industry then who say what we're doing is legal, I just encourage you who are listening to challenge that perspective, because just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Just because it's legal doesn't necessarily make it ethical. It just makes it legal. It makes it that we can do what it is that we're doing. And so with that, something that I noticed with Dogwood, I want to set this up first before I ask the question. Something I noticed that Dogwood did that I noticed other organizations didn't do, at least from my experience since I've been involved, you always got the input of the community before you went and did something.
That's right.
With the community. That's one of the things I brought when I came to Yale, because I learned that tactic from you and also from my parents being civil rights activists. But when I saw you all doing this, let me tell you, I'm going to put a term out there that I never associated with Dogwood because of what I saw. White saviorism. I never associated that with Dogwood, but it was because I didn't look at Dogwood like we need to help these people. It was more like, man, this is going on and we know who's affected. And Dogwood was also clear about how they were affected. So then it was never about going out and saving, like say it was about connecting, relating, supporting, and grow, like you said, movement, power, so on and so forth. So that's why I'm not relaying that to Dogwood, which is why I'm going to ask this question. What have you learned? Because I know you've learned a lot. It hadn't been easy. Advocating for environmental justice with a cross-cultural coalition in states that have been historically underserving folk of color. And I want to also put other groups in there, underserving women and also underserving people who also identify as LGBTQ+, underserving, indigenous communities, because not all indigenous communities identify as, communities of color. Do you have any points of encouragement for people trying to do the same in other areas of the country? And let me say before she answers, they have been successful in helping communities get land. They have been successful in changing the way that land use has been happening that has hurt communities. They have been successful in getting in front of politicians, making them uncomfortable. I know because I've been in the room and seen it happen and called out greenwashing, white. Y'all have done that. So I just want to say that before you answer that for anyone else who's listening, they've done this already and they're continuing to do it. Okay. You can tell I love Dogwood. All right. Okay. Back to the question.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Emily Zucchino, who is a staffer at Dogwood and who has really led a lot of the work that we've been doing in the last 10 years, reaching out to and building relationships with communities that are on the front lines of this new threat to Southern forests, which is the expansion of the wood pellet industry, where they're burning wood pellets from southern forests for energy in Europe and calling it renewable energy. But anyway, I just have to give a shout out to Emily because she's been on the front lines of that work for Dogwood, of being in the communities. And I think the thing that we have learned and, that I have learned, I can speak in the I have learned is that, the most important thing is the relationships. And, we're not going in there. We have some information that people may not know about, and they may not be getting that information because the information that they're getting is coming from government or industry, right? So we're there to offer a different perspective and to share information in a different light. But what we found is that in environmental justice communities, it's not a hard sell that like this industry is dirty and destructive and isn't benefiting the community. Like they get it immediately, right? Like, oh yeah, that wood pellet, oh, it's going to pollute. Oh, it's going to destroy the forest. Oh yeah, that's not good, Whereas what we found in communities in the past where we've worked in more affluent white communities is that there's always this like, well, but, they're going to replant, there's always the like, but, and jobs and, this, but in working with the communities on the front lines of the wood pellet industry, where these environmental justice communities are already overburdened with, like, they're dealing with the hog farms, they're dealing with the chicken plants, they're dealing, this is not new to them. And when they see it in the same light as these other industries, and we're able to just provide information about, hey, this mill is coming in, or, are you aware of this facility? Immediately it's almost like, it's not a sell. We don't have to sell it. And I think that's really important, is not to be in selling mode, right? Not to be like, you need to do this and you need to do that. But are you aware of this? Do you know the impacts of it? Are you experiencing any of the impacts? And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is just being authentic, being, recognizing that trust building takes time, and taking the time to build the trust. And that means not just coming in with our own agenda, but actually listening to the other issues that the community is dealing with, and becoming a partner in the bigger picture of transformation that needs to happen in the community. And the piece that we can help with is the piece around the wood processing facilities and the pollution and the industrial logging. But we understand that that's not the only issue that these communities are facing. And being a partner in kind of the bigger picture of supporting community transformation. And so I think that's the other thing, is that as a forest protection organization, we've had to really broaden our scope out to think about things like, how does the forest industry intersect with poverty? And how does the forest industry intersect with, the economic conditions in these rural communities? And if you look at the fact that the South is the world's largest wood producing region, and these communities are still suffering, there doesn't seem to be a really good track record of the forest industry in its claims about all these jobs and economic development, that they don't have a good track record. Like there's not a good, thing for them to show on the ground that what they're saying is actually true in these communities. So we've had to look at that. We've had to look at, like, how does the land ownership pattern, create inequity? When you look in these communities and the majority of the population is Black or Indigenous in some of the communities where we work, but the overwhelming majority of the land is owned by white people still, 400 years later. And we know that's by design. We know that land ownership and wealth accumulation has intentionally been restricted in these communities, in Indigenous and Black communities. We know this. There's a long, well-documented pattern of, land grabs and, the 40 acres and a mule never actually manifesting, the promise to give the slaves after, they were freed, 40 acres and a mule never really manifested. And where slaves did get land, it was then, they were then, weaseled out of it. And it was stolen from them and stolen from a Native American. So, we see that pattern persist today. People feel like, oh, that was so long ago, but actually that pattern still exists today. So we've had to look at things like that. We've had to look at pollution, which hasn't been a part historically of our mission as an organization. But, you can't separate. This is one of the things the communities have helped us to understand, is that you can't separate the logging from the pollution. Those logs are going somewhere, they're going to a factory, and that factory is emitting massive amounts of air pollution that is making people sick. So if you're a forest protection organization, but you're not looking upstream at the impacts that this industry is having on people, you're missing the bigger picture of, the whole system around forest destruction. So we've had to embrace the intersectionality, right, of all of these issues that are fundamental to environmental injustice. And we do that through the lens of our work as a forest protection organization. And I've also found that working in Black and Indigenous communities is some of the most fun and inspiring and heartfelt work I've ever done in my life. The people are just so much fun to work with, and tell it like it is. Don't hold back. They have this amazing ability to hold the pain and also the joy, and the strength and resilience and of through all that they have endured is beyond humbling for me as a leader. It's like, I'm not a leader. Gosh, I haven't gone through any of this stuff, and incredibly inspiring. And, I've been doing this work for a long time, Rashad, I've been doing it for almost 30 years now. And it's working in these communities has given me like a second wind. People say a lot of times, how do you sustain this? How do you keep doing this? It's such hard work, and you're faced with destruction and an uphill battle on the daily. And it's like, part of it is, being able to be in community and in right relationships with the people that we work with in these communities. And that means so much for so many reasons.
Thank you for listening to the Heartwood Podcast. We are able to provide this broadcast to you because of the partnership of Yale School of the Environment and the Easley Branch LLC. If you are interested in any other content, particularly from the Easley Branch, please visit our website at theeasleybranch.com. Thank you. I just want to hit pause real quick. I think everyone listening, I just want to do something that I need to do for myself, which is almost like give like a little summary of some of what I've heard, particularly for people who care and want change and want to be change agents. One, you need to be curious about the community that you want to help. And you also need to be respectful of the community that you want to help. It's better if you're invited to come help than just showing up. Two, you need to think about reciprocity. Not only the impact you're having, but also the effect that it's having on you. And also be mindful of how it is that you're showing up, being willing to be courageous, because you're going to do things and say things and challenge things that may not always be supportive of everything, but also being open to be checked and challenged. Because when you're in the space, people may say things that could challenge you, or also just say things that you're like, well, I wouldn't say that. They're not lying, especially if it's facts, that people are saying. Being able to monitor and be self-aware of what you're bringing into a space and what you're bringing into a room, whether it's energy, so on and so forth. And then also to care about the experiences that other people have had. Because then that last point, the last response, it made me think about if I was to ask someone a question like this: was slavery 200 plus years ago, or was it yesterday? Mm-hmm. Now, depending on who you're talking to, depends on how that question is going to get answered. Because if you're a descendant of someone who was enslaved and you're still dealing with, the injustices, it's today or yesterday. Mm-hmm. And if you're a person who has no connection to it, right, you just look at it historically and so on and so forth, it was a long time ago, we need to go ahead and we need to get over that. And I'm bringing up that example because I can bring up that example for every community that's been marginalized, just a different context, just a different one. And so I think that the other thing to do that I'm learning here and what you're saying is to be humble, because you never know what people have experienced and gone through. And so try not to judge their experiences, try not to qualify it yourself, but to just be open and be curious and let them give it to you. Because what you said to me, my friend, is that you got your second win when you're working with these communities, and it keeps you going. I always thought Danna was on the second win because I've never seen Danna tired, never even really seen Danna negative. So sometimes I wonder what aspirin is she taking. But anyway, but that's because you really care about the people and the work that you're doing. So with that, we just have a couple more questions. Danna and I have really crucial conversations at times. Not me agitated with her, her agitated with me, the agitation with the world and what's going on in the world. And last time we talked about I remember this conversation still. I'm glad Ben, I don't know how you got him. I'm glad you put this here. We talked about redistributing wealth and the importance of redistributing pain. I had just recorded a song called Redistribution at the time when Dan and I were talking about this, right? And that's literally what the song was about. But I'm asking this because it comes more from an angle of sharing the pain, so no one person, group, or other being bears too much suffering. If we can, no suffering at all. My friend, how do you see us redistributing feelings and experiences to create a more just society? And we're not looking for a perfect answer, just just please feel free, because I do feel like you can answer this because of all of the work that you're doing, and that you're successfully doing. And so I really do think that we need to hear that from you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think there's so many different layers to that question. One is, I think more people need to actually, visit some of these areas and talk with some of the people who are being impacted. A lot of times it's easy, out of sight, out of mind. People over in Europe, they're getting their electricity, they're turning their lights on. They are not aware of, the devastating impacts that the wood pellet industry, which is being burned in their power stations, right? The pellets are being burned in their power stations. They don't have any concept of the impacts that are happening in the community. So, but bigger picture, we need to stop the ability of dirty industry to prey on communities that are already overburdened. And what that would do would then be to put that industry in some more affluent community, which would then be a very visceral experience in terms of understanding the pain and the impacts that facilities have on communities, right? Nobody's wishing that somebody else experience that. That's not the point of that. The point of that is, if we stop doing this in these communities, it would be less likely that those facilities would get built at all, right? Because we know where the political power lies, unfortunately, in a lot of places, is outside of those communities. And white affluent or more affluent communities have the resources and the capacity to be able to fight back some of these industries in ways that local communities don't. So keeping dirty industry out of being able to, preventing them from being able to continuously prey on overburdened communities is a critical part of the strategy of helping to eliminate this problem. And then I think even bigger picture than that, we have an economic system right now that is concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a few. And it's predicated on this kind of globalization of the economy, right? Where you can tear down forests in the southeastern US and for the benefit of people overseas. And if the resource were actually used and controlled by the community, we would not see that level of destruction, because you don't need, however many millions of pounds of wood pellets in Gloucester, Mississippi. They don't need that, right? So if we had economies that were more community-based and local, with more local control over the resources, you wouldn't have this large-scale industrial exploitation that is there to supply global markets. You would only have the community using what it needed for its own needs. And so that's where we need to get to, is a breakthrough of this whole industrial extraction economy. We need to get to a more locally based economy where people have control over the resources around them to use for the benefit of their community, and not be exploited for global profits, for global markets that then are used to generate massive amounts of profits that end up in the pockets of a few people.
A few people who never even go to that land that's being harmed, and not even from that community. It's like they never see it.
Right.
So it's like, I love what you said. I don't like that it's the truth. I just love that you said it, out of sight, out of mind. Now, Danna, I know that we've talked, I think, about hard things up so far, and we never avoid the hard stuff. But, let's just see if I can twist it by asking you another question. Because I have cherished memories of working with Dogwood. I have the anger of what I deal with before I come to a Dogwood board meeting, and the joy after a Dogwood board meeting, or the anger of what was going on in South Carolina. Then you take us to a community and we talk to people while it's still hard. I'm like, but I feel more encouraged because the folks who are living here are still fighting. It's like they're not giving up. So, could you tell us a cherished story that you have related, to your work, at Dogwood, and what does the story mean? And I know in the story you're going to talk about community and people and members, I'm sure, so could you also just in there just share with us, like, what do the people mean? What do the staff mean to Dogwood, And if you want me to answer that as a former board member, it's all going to be positive. You let me know. I'll answer that part, okay?
Well, maybe, okay, you answer that part.
I got you. All right.
There are so many cherished moments that I've had in this organization that, it's hard to pick one. But I think one that really resonated with me in a pretty profound way was when I went on tour with Reverend Leo Woodbury across the South on the Justice First tour. And, this was at the very beginning of Dogwood, sort of like real effort to commit to environmental justice. This was, we were maybe 5 years in, and I felt so honored to be asked by Reverend Leo, who's a very well-respected leader in the environmental justice movement and just an amazing community organizer, but also, advocates at the national and even at the international level. In fact, he's in Dubai right now at the climate talks, and so he invited me to go on this tour. He wanted to go on this tour across the South to, to Black communities and talk about getting out of silos and working together across differences and across issue areas, and talking about the underlying problem of environmental justice and how, everything relates to all of the injustice can kind of relate back to the environmental justice, whether it's economic injustice or gender injustice or, whatever environmental, it all comes back to this economic injustice. So we went to the Fourth Ward of New Orleans, which is, the place that, got hit hardest by Katrina because the government didn't keep the levees up in that part of the city because it's low income and Black. And this was years, it'd been 10 years, 13 years or whatever since Katrina. When we were there, and the community was still trying to rebuild, but there was evidence all throughout New Orleans and the more affluent areas that it looked like normal. This area still looked a little bit like a community coming out of a war zone, but the community person took us to this spot that was very special to the community. So in the midst of all this struggle to rebuild, they created this beautiful access to the wetlands. They created this space where there was like a platform where you could overlook the wetland forest. And, it was just a place of peace. And it had a plaque on it that was like, we're going to restore this to its old growth. Like they had these pictures of old, cypress trees on the plaque. And it was like this monument, and the community created it. They got no money or no help from the government, from anybody else. They chose to spend precious time and resources to build this access to this wetland because of the relationship that the community had to that wetland forest. And at that point in my journey, I realized how little I knew or appreciated the connection of the Black community to nature and to the forest. That, like many people who are white have this assumption that, they've got so many other problems to deal with that forest protection is not really important, And that moment just really underscored for me how little I knew about the deep connection that Black community has with forests and with nature. And all of a sudden, it just made my whole perspective on the work that we're doing shift to recognize that it was in alignment that it was already in alignment, that there wasn't a need to do anything. It was just about making connections. It was just about building relationships, that it wasn't anything that I needed to do to make that connection real. And that was a very humbling experience, but also on the other side of that was hugely inspirational and gave me so much hope for the future, to realize the ally that I had as a forest defender in the Black community.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Then I'll answer the other part of it. That was a campaign that I also worked with everyone, being a forest defender, and I thank Dogwood for doing that. The staff are, in my opinion, really elevated more as partners in the work. If you work with Dogwood, and I actually feel that the community is too, because you go and get input from the community, you share the information back with the community to make sure that you know what you're talking about, and then the staff gets busy. And then you bring the board in, to help us, and then we're treated also, as equal parts, of the community. I mean, yeah, we are, but it's one thing to say is that because of out of obligation, and then it's another thing to say it's like that out of relation. And it's very intentional, with the way, that you do this. And so, Danna, you do all of this. I've known you now for over 7-8 years. Your hair is not falling out. You look younger. Okay. It's okay. Well, it's always looked fresh and great. And you say 30 years in this game. I don't know if anyone would believe that, but they should. And my question is, how do you find peace and happiness outside of this work? Because I know it's not easy. I've been in hard conversations that you sat through, and you keep going and you maintain your peace, at least it looks like it, and it feels like it. But how do you find peace, and happiness, in this work? And if you mention going on one of those amazing hikes I always see on Instagram that I'm jealous of, I'm gonna be mad. Is that how you do it? And I haven't been invited? We need to talk. I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, you're going to be mad because that is an easy answer for me, and that is, the way I stay, focused, and the way that I keep from being overwhelmed at the big picture. Everybody gets overwhelmed in a moment every so often. I take to the woods. I truly do. When I get in the woods, everything goes away. All the worries, all the stress of the day, of the big picture. I get in the woods and I can be in the moment. I can feel my body change when I 10 minutes in to being in the woods. I can feel my body relax. I can feel my mind start to clear out. And I start to feel this understanding that I am just one of a bigger system in the world, that I am a part of nature, that I look at the little squirrels going around and they're not worried about all this stuff we're worried about, because they're just living how they're supposed to live. They're just gathering their nuts for the winter. They play their role in the ecosystem. They know what it is, and they do it well. And, and I see that, and it makes me just remember that I too am a part of that system, as much as I'm a part of this other constructed system that doesn't make any sense, and that's insane, and that's traumatic, and that's abusive and oppressive. I am also a part of this other system that is just amazing, where everything has its place and everything is working together. And so that the forest gives me hope. And I will also say, just to say another thing about our staff, and our board, we have such a committed staff and board. And it's not that we have not struggled internally as our staff has become more diverse. I am a white woman leader, come from a background of privilege, and it's not that we have not had some, stress and challenges around trying to figure out how Dogwood can let go of some of the systems that mirror the bigger system that we're operating in ways that can show up in being not as equitable, right? And so we've really leaned into that and are really still on the journey of trying to figure out how to balance that internal equity with the external expectations of how you're supposed to run an organization or how you're supposed to use resources in an organization. And those external expectations are real, but we're trying to really lean into the tension between doing something transformative internally on the equity side and maintaining our organization and our funding and continuing to be, focused on using the resources we can to affect the external world to the extent that we can. And it's a challenging time, but it's also an exciting time to be in this space as a white leader of an organization that's doing so much in the environmental justice space. And every day I have to take a step back and relearn what it means to be a leader, And to me, that journey of continuous learning is also something that I think in the big picture of things helps me sustain myself in an organization, is that constant learning. I'm somebody who just constantly wants to learn and wants to change and improve. And Dogwood has created that amazing vessel for me to be in mode of continuous evolution on my personal journey. And I just am so grateful for that every day, as hard as it can be sometimes, I'm grateful for it.
Everyone, I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation with Danna. There's so many gems or jewels. It's too many to mention, but as we close with this last question, Danna, I just want to just repeat what you said: continuous learning, constant learning, continuous evolution. And while at times, at times, but not most of it, at times it can be challenging, you're so thankful for that, and to me, that is another sign of how authentic you are, genuine you are, and also that we need leaders who can do this. We need leaders who can bring the rain when we need it, who can enjoy the sunshine, and who can also maybe sit in the heat, the southern heat, both from the south, sit in that fire, because all that fire does is burn the things off so that we can show back up in a powerful way, just as what happens when something is prescribed in the nature. And then, of course, the wildlife, they come right back. Everything's richer now, if it's done in the right way. And I think Dogwood is intentional in working to do that and challenging yourselves. And as I said in the movie, remember the Titans, attitude reflects leadership. I think Dogwood does that, have a powerful leader. So, Danna, how can people get involved with Dogwood Alliance or similar types of work or organizations? Because the other thing is, Dogwood does not do this work alone, in case you haven't heard what Danna said, that they're always connecting with other people. But I think that people need to be connected with DA. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, people can always jump on our website, which is dogwoodalliance.org. We have an ambassador program that people can get involved in if people want to get more involved in the work that we're doing. And that's also an opportunity for people to get connected with some of the community groups that we work with. So it's not just about, Dogwood, but getting involved in Dogwood's work, but it's also how people can get synced up with the communities that we work with. So that's probably the best way, is to sign up on our email list, consider becoming an ambassador. We do have a forest offender program for people who want to support the work. And Dogwood also is committed to and has, provided grants for the community partners that we work with, and dedicates a lot of capacity to helping our community partners raise money. So we've raised over $1 million plus for the community partners that we work with in in the last couple of years. And so anybody that wants to support Dogwood would know that that money will also go to support our community partners as well. But if people want to support individual community partners that we work with, we certainly encourage that as well. That's really important for money to get down on the ground to communities where it's needed the most. And you can just connect with us over our ambassador program or through our forest defender program, and we can figure out how to get the money where anybody that wants to contribute wants it to go. So those are the three ways: get involved, sign up on our email list, sign up as an ambassador, and become a forest defender.
Everyone, Danna just made it simple for you, and Danna just let you know. And I can attest to everything that Danna said is true. When I worked at Yale, students wanted to get connected and do some work. I called Danna, and Danna got still a wonderful student of mine connected. Okay?
Oh, that's true. We do have an internship program as well. So for students out there who are listening and want to get more involved, we got you.
Okay. Everyone, I hope you have enjoyed this, and we would be remiss if we just didn't ask one last thing. Danna, is there anything that you want to share? Anything that I neglected to ask you, that you or anything that you want to share with us? We want to make sure that you have that last floor. Definitely.
I think the only thing to leave people with is that, we're living in some challenging times, and it's easy to feel cynical, and it's easy to think that it's too overwhelming a problem for us to overcome. But I hope people leave this podcast with an understanding that, that hope is alive, and that I do believe that we're in the middle right now of revolutionary times. And on the other side of that revolution is progress on these issues in a pretty profound way. I think we're in a moment right now similar to the civil rights movement, similar to the women's rights movement, similar to the anti-war movement of, the 60s and 70s. And we're in that movement right now. And sometimes it's hard to see that because it looks very different than the movements of the past. But we are there. We are in a revolution right now. And I believe that the people power is coming together for us to be able to affect the change that we all believe and know needs to happen.
Everyone, we're going to drop the mic on that. Myself, Brother Lupo, we appreciate you being here. It's Dr. Thomas Richard Easley, aka Hip Hop Forester. But more importantly, this is the Heartwood Podcast. We want to thank Yale, always for the support. I want to thank Bennett for helping to set this up. And I want to thank Danna Smith for your time, and Dogwood Alliance for the great work that you're doing. Everyone, please continue to do this work. It is about revolution, not perfection. It is about community and not reputation. So we need to work together. And Danna, thank you for being an example of that, teaching me, because you have, showing me that, and also supporting me in the work that I've done, because Danna has done that. Supported me, I think, more than the other way around. So I really hope that Dogwood continues to expand, grow, and that more people will find out about Dogwood and get engaged. Remember, y'all, one earth, one planet, but same population, same needs. So we need each other. We need this earth. Y'all take care, and we take care of each other and give care the same way. Till next time we talk on the Heartwood Podcast, we're out. Peace.